I always underestimated Nixon, see? I always underestimated him.
Bitter in defeat.
You won't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
He changed the world.
In one stroke, the balance of power has shifted to our favor.
Lost a nation.
These kids are useless. Go on, get him!
And paid the price of power.
Others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself. No, we can't keep a damn secret in this government. They're stealing papers right out of this office.
Now we can create our own intelligence unit right here inside the White House.
Yeah, we got the press this time.
We got the big bull. We're back.
Do you really want this stick? Then I'll be there for you. And we are gonna win this time. I can feel it.
Yes, there are divisions in this country.
That's because you created them.
No young man who a great hero is? Abraham Lincoln. He brought this country together.
I love that man. I love him.
Daddy, you're the most decent person I know. They don't know the real you.
If there's anyone in this country who knows more than me, it's...
And I'm David Whiting.
And today, bizarrely out of order, all manner of different things. But me and Jay recorded a series of episodes, and then they continued and were like, oh, and we noticed that there were films going against each other in theme and that side of things. And I liked this double bill concept. And then me and David recorded a JFK episode on, are you ready for this, David? Monday, the 4th of February.
Oh my God. Jesus, time flies.
Today of recording is Monday, the 14th of October. As yet to come out. Then through a series of different things, this has developed into the David Whiting double feature. Whoa! And so, what better movie to discuss than Oliver Stone's other? Well, technically, this is a trilogy. The unfortunate dull shoe at the end of this is W, which isn't great and is quite cartoonish in a way that JFK and Nixon, well, you might say to their detriment, are overly serious. W has none of that seriousness or insight or operatic quality. And so we're not doing that. We're just doing them as a double bill of JFK and Nixon. I was writing an Oliver Stone article, and I was in the middle of the ocean, and on Disney Plus, as one does, and I was looking for movies to download for my next passage across the ocean. And Nixon was on Disney Plus, free to download. And I thought, I'll take this off my Oliver Stone watch list, because I'd always been told that it was quite bad.
Really?
I don't know where this... So, like, again, osmosis. That obviously, well, it doesn't take a genius. You know, Anthony Hopkins looks nothing like Nixon.
He looks nothing like Nixon, but I thought his performance was excellent as Nixon.
One of the best performances of the 90s. And so you get that sort of... I'm sure I read on one article, I can't attribute it to anybody, of like bizarre Oscar nominations and all that sort of thing. I thought, oh, right, is it really that bad? Then there was some other article I was reading about JFK, and they were talking about Nixon derogatorily, and they said about how all of Stone's inquisitiveness and that side of things is blinded in Nixon by a clear hatred for the figure. And I was like, what?
Really? I thought, if anything, this movie went out of its way to sort of make him as sort of like sympathetic as possible, because I think you could have been much harsher to Nixon than this movie was.
Exactly. So then I sit down, and it's in between. The first time I watched this movie was probably the worst way one could, which is in 10-minute snippets on an iPad in the middle of the ocean, in between shuffleboard and quiz. But
Jesus,
and I could have set, like, it got to a point though where I was like, oh, I've got an evening off in 2 nights' time. I can sit down and watch the rest of it. But it so engrossed me and so overwhelmed me to such a level as the first time I watched JFK and I became so enraptured with this, for my money, a real hidden gem, that I was grabbing 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. I just completely enraptured. David, what was your first experience with Oliver Stone's 1995 Nixon?
I thought it was quite good. I was surprised, especially knowing that this is an Oliver Stone movie and kind of what a big fan of Kennedy he was, just how sympathetic Nixon was made out to be, and kind of this like deeply flawed man. I mean, still evil, kind of at the end of the day, but if not necessarily intentionally so, more as a flaw of his own kind of character, almost like a tragic kind of Greek style figure whose own sort of inherent character, his own inherent character flaws kind of lead to his ultimate downfall in a way. But also, not entirely sympathetic, certainly a man obsessed with the idea of having power just for the sake of having power, a man who wants to do good things, but also wants to be adored for them, which I think is a very normal human want.
I think Oliver Stone is clearly enthralled by Nixon and invested in Nixon. And, I couldn't find any reporting on it to this effect, but I don't know whether or not heading into making the film Nixon and choosing to write it and going through the intensive investigative reporting that he does with this series of writers, whether this was the movie he thought he was going to make by the end. But then you talk, again, this was faced with the exact same issues that JFK was, that script leaks, and then the Nixon family obviously come out against it.
I can imagine so.
Imagine if they didn't. Like, you got it. That's Dad. And script leaks. And Oliver Stone talked often about how a script's a script, and that it was a Charlie Rose interview, and he was saying how he wished the family would see it, because they were clearly making their statement of dismissal based on the script leaks. And he said about how he wished they would see it, because to have Sir Anthony Hopkins portray Richard Nixon takes, the final
sort of
prayer
elevates him in a way.
Oh yeah. Again, bullet points. JFK is all about what's the opposite of interiority? Going outwards. It's a snake eating its own tail and then continuing to eat and then exploding and going like, okay, we're going to focus on the Jim Garrison case about the JFK assassination. No, I'm going to use that as a vehicle for every single angle,
for everything else that happened.
and we're going to go over here. We're going to go over there, and then just when you think it can't get, you bring in the late great Donald Sutherland. That we recorded that episode before Donald Sutherland passed, and the first thing he did when he passed, YouTube, Mr. X JFK, all 15 minutes. And this is the opposite. This is a movie that does touch on all the history, is conspiratorial,
but is very intensely focused on sort of the personal struggles of Richard Nixon. It was interesting, sort of like the history and the sort of like world-shaking things that he did do were sort of treated as the backdrop for his own sort of personal unraveling in a way. As he held on to the presidency, and sort of the idea of, kind of absolute power corrupting absolutely. There was one point during the movie, I think, when Richard Nixon was giving his victory speech and all the things that he wanted to bring to the country, like healthcare for all, and that people should be housed, and that there should be enough food for everyone to eat. These are the sorts of things that a modern day Republican candidate, saying this at the RNC would immediately be hamstrung by the whole crowd.
Obviously we're looking at this from a modern political lens, but no line made me laugh more than what is it? I've got it in What's the Change jokingly. Dick, you're only 47, and then he says, and then I'll be
too old for this game.
And then I'll be 49, and then I'll be 50, and then I'll lose my faculties. And
one of my favorite lines was, "No one's ever contested a presidential election in history."
Got that right down.
That's political suicide, Nixon. You can't do that. No one will ever vote for you again.
Evil is a very strong word, and evil is evil. But there is a somewhat rose-tinted glass that you can look at Nixon and some of the others now. And not necessarily, obviously, in regards to Cambodia, in regards to Vietnam, in regards to what can be politely referred to as genocide. But when it comes to Watergate and him being a paranoid man and planting tapes and trying to steal a few pieces of things. And you just look at the widespread nature of not intellectual theft. What's it called? Anyway, and how Watergate now looks so
tame.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is that Richard Nixon pretty much established the new rules by which American politics are run. I mean, we look back on it now, and these are all kind of cutesy compared to the political scandals that we have now. But it was Richard Nixon who set the tone for that being something that could be a possibility, and we've seen the further degradation over the years since him. I mean,
but at least he resigned.
Not that other presidents weren't doing shady things before him, but Richard Nixon was the guy who made it acceptable in politics, or in American politics, at least.
And I think that's what's so brilliant about Hopkins' portrayal and Stone writing Nixon is his own set of rules. I love when he talks about the Kennedys and he said, I never had a mistress. They're screwing every goddamn waitress. And he goes, that's my rule. Okay. I never cheated. And you've got Kennedy with the tunnels and, and the running women in and out. But I never did that. A president can do horrific,
can abuse the powers of his office, rework the Constitution, start genocides and all manner of extrajudicial killings. But I never cheated on my wife.
I think it was Robin Billy. Maybe it was Billy Crystal, but it was talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Bill Clinton scandals happening around the 70s. You don't fuck the maid. That's the one rule. You don't fuck the maid. This movie opens with again, another bullet point. This is a movie. I don't necessarily think that Stone hates Nixon. Well, no, I'm sure he does. He's a very, very liberal man, and I'm sure he and was in the Vietnam War, and so I'm sure there is a distinct major part of him that hates Nixon. But this is a sympathetic to some. I don't even necessarily think it's sympathetic in some ways, but I think it's just bold, truthful, and operatic, and doesn't flinch away from the terrors that he did. Doesn't flinch away from all the terrible things, but also doesn't flinch away from what a toll that took on him. And what an image, that him drinking and pilling alone in the Lincoln Room near the end and re-listening to all those tapes is like based on multiple eyewitnesses. That's not a fabrication. Obviously, there's the great Robert Altman film Secret Honor, starring Philip Baker Hall, which is based, I believe, off a one-man play, which is just Nixon in his red smoking jacket in those final moments. And that alludes somewhat to him having his finger on the button and going to be suicidal and all that sort of thing. Masterful film in its own right. I think this goes a bit deeper by expanding beyond that room. And it doesn't even really use it as the framing device that you think it's going to do. You don't, like every 20 minutes he comes back, and he picks up a tape and it's like, Cambodia 63, and you're like, put the Cambodia tape in, which would have so easily, for a film as unwieldy as this is. My opinion aside, I don't know what your opinion is. It's unwieldy, it's slightly messy, but it all feels of a piece. It flies by. It's long, obviously.
It fits together well, and I think kind of the stylistic choice to have sort of like black and white flashbacks when he is remembering stuff that is specifically on the tapes, things that are like, kind of historically documented, and then kind of coming into color for the sort of dramatized bits and the sort of imagined things, is a good way of kind of bringing it all together.
I can hear a bomb dropping, David. Is that J. Robert Oppenheimer? So Christopher Nolan talked a lot when Oppenheimer came out about how JFK was a huge influence on him. But rewatching Nixon after watching Oppenheimer, sure, it's just this is Oppenheimer. 3 hours, no conflation of characters. I'm going to make you learn all of these names that was the big, like, that was two decisions that Nolan allegedly made early on in the script writing process. Was, I'm not going to conflate any of the characters, and the way to get around that, some people thought it worked, some people didn't think it worked. I thought it worked. Casting all these great names again. Not everybody knows nowadays who JT Walsh is, the same as they know about David is. And sure, I can go, that guy bingo. Oh yeah, it's David Paymer. But they're all recognizable faces, and they're all brilliant actors in these, whether it's E.G. Marshall, acclaimed film star of the 40s and 50s, showing up, of 12 Angry Men, showing up for 20 minutes. And, everybody is in. And I think
Ed Harris in this for all of 10.
Yeah. There was a lot of goodwill. Despite the multiple controversies surrounding it, I see JFK as a bit of a Titanic situation. Like, so much talking about it beforehand, then it goes on to be a huge grosser, be critically acclaimed for the most part, and be nominated for a lot of Oscars. Obviously, Titanic does win the Oscars. JFK wins 0, or maybe no. I think it took editing anyway. Nixon so then you build up a lot of goodwill, and from that there was a huge. I can't remember which studio it was, but they basically set Stone up with his next 3 films, and I believe the rule was about a 45 million budget. They can be within 45 million. He says, "I'm going to make Nixon my next film. I can do it within 45 million." The final budget is 44 million, so he does do it.
Wow.
But difference to JFK. This movie only grosses 13.7 million. It does get nominated for Oscars, but, well, same as JFK, doesn't win any. I think it goes without saying, and I think it's very obvious what the difference is, but, like, JFK, you leave JFK and you're like, oh, who did it? What do you think? Oh, and it does end somewhat on a hopeful note, as stupid as that sounds. Whereas
sort of the idea that, truth can eventually prevail. Yes, I did kind of find myself finishing this movie and being sort of emotionally like, ugh.
Yeah.
Sort of Anthony Hopkins' line there at the end, where he's sort of staring at the portrait of John F. Kennedy, and when they look at you, they see everything they want to be, and when they look at me, they see everything that they are. Sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, pretty much.
It's and the irony, of course, of JFK's presidential portrait in that, Jackie didn't want this, magisterial painting, which they've always done. She wanted it to be more thoughtful, that Kennedy was a more thoughtful figure. And you look at that image of Kennedy in the presidential portrait, and it just looks how Nixon looks all the time, head down and arms forward. But the irony being that nobody sees Nixon that way, and yet nobody, what you know what I'm saying. Nobody sees Nixon necessarily as the thoughtful one, even though Kennedy was the thoughtful one, even though for better or for worse, Nixon was most likely a lot more politically minded and a lot more in foreign affairs.
I think the movie definitely does a good job of showing what a good politician and power broker Nixon is. And definitely touches on sort of like one of his major accomplishments, which was opening up China and the East and kind of restarting talks with the Russians. And he did achieve like sort of peace at the time. He just had the thorn.
He had the thorn. Stone is very adamant on 2 things in all interviews. He says, if they managed to shut the war down within his first year, he'd have been a hero and proclaimed as the greatest American president of all time. And if Stone thinks that he had about up until 1973, where he could have spoke aloud and talked about Watergate and say, I screwed. They
talked about it even in the movie. They sort of said if we had just come out and said it back then, we'd have been fine and had our second term. But it's too late for that now, and it's come too far. I think the movie goes out of its way to show him almost like. I think Machiavellian is a very loaded word and tends to be thought of as like inherently evil. But I think it just means someone who recognizes the levers of power and how to work them. Especially in his scenes with Kissinger, it's sort of so very clear. Like he was a dude who was playing the political long game and was thinking about like the geopolitical kind of implications of everything that he did and the potential power of the presidency, while also being very much mindful of the fact that it is a limited position within a system that, you know, can dispose of him as quickly as it can, you know, elevate him.
And he's constantly, and I think again the film does a wonderful job at portraying that with the Mary Steenburgen and all the flashbacks. He has this chip on his side, which again pits him against Kennedy. Or he has this chip on his shot, and again he abuses that. We're constantly talking about the Levin farm. He is from an impoverished background with two dead brothers, and you know a terrible relationship with his father, and a deeply religious and perhaps overbearing mother. And he always puts this, you know. Born on a lemon farm, and it was the poorest lemon farm, you know, at the lemon ranch
in California. Let me tell you that.
And whereas Kennedy again, perhaps on a platter, you know, and all that sort of
certainly handed to him on it. I mean, you know, they called him, you know, sort of the king of Camelot. You know, he was the chosen son.
The film is this is how the film opens. The film is a dramatic interpretation of events and characters based on public sources and an incomplete historical record. Some scenes and events are presented as composites or have been hypothesized or condensed. Yes. The movie was actually completed around the time Nixon died in 1994. So the footage of his funeral at the end, along with the narrated epilogue from Stone himself, was added multiple months before the movie's release. So there is some reporting that was added on as a tack. It was added on mostly around the time the film was being finished. By chance he died. And like any good movie... Sorry?
Makes sense, you know.
Yeah. And like any good movie, we open with a Bible quote. For what is a man profited? And if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul. Again, we go to Nixon. Again, we go to Oppenheimer. You know, Prometheus gave humans about it. It's like, whether it's on purpose or not, this is... indeed. 10-minute stretch. Nixon losing to JFK. And then, again, it's a very easy... The minute that Vice did it and all that sort of thing, but the minute you don't know much about the wife in public record is the minute you bring out the Lady Macbeth card. And this movie doesn't really go that far. It just paints Pat as a very reserved... And I think Joan Allen's marvelous in this.
She did a lovely job. I kind of saw the portrayal of Pat Nixon, less Lady Macbeth and more sort of an unwilling kind of... I thought she served as a lovely sort of like watermark of all the people that he was losing and how truly isolated he was becoming, because we kind of start at the beginning of the movie with her being like his one sort of constant, his one source of emotional support, and we see how far apart they grow throughout the time of his presidency, essentially. Like, still partners, still in this together to a degree, but very much like growing apart and not the same kind of relationship at the end as when they started, I'd say.
I mean, that's where in that first losing to JFK, that wonderful stretch leading into his sort of manic addressing the reporters. Before that, we get Joan Allen, you know, we get Pat. We don't have to put ourselves through this again. And that's her angle. And again, it serves as a Greek tragedy prologue to the rest of the film that we're going to see. She's like
so we can see how far he falls.
She's the angel on the mound, or whatever the Greek. She comes. You don't have to do this again. You don't have to do it. Of course, he's going to do it. 10-minute stretch. The opening meeting the Nixons, which could be its own TV show. The wonderful Tony Goldwyn and Mary Steenburgen.
Meet the Nixons.
Come on in, meet the Nixons. You know we don't take well to humour. And then this incredible way, this Quaker, deeply religious way that Mary Steenburgen speaks. Can thou at least take off thy apron? Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
And his wonderful father at the dinner table with his speech. When Eve got into all that business with the snake.
And the mother staring daggers at him for throughout the dinner.
Why are you wearing blood at the... I'm not
Which
ashamed.
I thought was nicely mirrored the sort of he doesn't take well to humor line, I found nicely mirrored later on in the movie with Nixon himself. I forget what the exact line was. It was sort of like, well, this isn't going to leak either. Or when he sits down to pray with Kissinger, well, this isn't going to leak, is it? And yeah, there's no chuckle, there's no mirth, there's no knowing smile between the two of them. It's just shut the hell up and like sit here and pray with me while I have my breakdown.
It's absolutely sensational, really. Manolo kitchen night conversation on Kennedy into sleeping at the Lincoln Memorial, which is allegedly true. There's no photos of it or anything like that, but many people have said that it happened. Nixon in the middle of the night having some sort of, again, you can call it arrogance, you can call it naivete, whatever you want to call it, but I'm sure he went up there and thought,
I'm going to convince them.
Yeah, if I actually, show them I'm a real person, shake their hand, here I am, hello everybody, and and then nope.
Yeah.
Well, why?
One of my favorite lines, I guess, favorite line for me would be that sort of moment of realization with the student where, she said, you couldn't stop it even if you wanted to, could you?
Yeah.
Like it's completely beyond you. You are just a part of a system that is like so completely beyond your ability to stop this. It doesn't like you're just a puppet essentially.
Yeah. 50 years in politics, and she's
that
19.
19-year-old student got it in a couple of seconds. What it's taken me 15 years in politics to realize.
Again, the movie does have, but overall, the movie shies away from that sort of simplicity, and that's what makes that moment work.
I think it plays with both. I think it plays with the idea of the president having all of these kind of astronomical powers and ability to shape history, while also being very much answerable to a far greater system that is largely outside of his control at this point. What with what is it, Option 2 or the CIA sort of like fix-it group. That has grown out of his control and that doesn't answer to anyone. The sort of like mafia influence and the big money influence that like paid for his election and his campaign, which at various times he is both sort of like beholden to, and then at other times when he's more politically kind of empowered, like less so, but very much like a man who knows the levers of power, that he is not an all-powerful like person able to do whatever. He's a very powerful man, but also very much answerable to this sort of shadowy underside of government, which you could argue is making all of the real decisions at the end of the day.
But on the other hand, this film, I don't think fully presents it that way. This film presents it as Nixon leading the charge. Sure, you've got the cabal underneath him, and then you've got the Larry Hagman down in Dallas stuff, which we'll discuss.
I did think sort of it shows Nixon leading the charge, but very much because other people put him in a position to do so. With the 4 deaths and the idea of like they cleared the way, they made sure that Robert Kennedy wasn't going to run for presidency. They, the kind of conversation at the racetrack where he's, well, if Robert Kennedy runs, he's got a great chance of beating me, sort of, and then, they kind of share a meaningful look between the mafioso and the big money capitalists of like, well, yeah, we can make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen. So I did find it definitely, I thought the movie lent more towards the idea that Nixon was this powerful, dynamic, politically minded figure who was put into the position to make massive changes because there was a shadowy sort of power structure behind him that cleared the way for a man who would have otherwise never been able to achieve the presidency had, events been allowed to take their own course.
And like anything, he's as Vice really, made its entire dictum and speech is that, you've got the people behind and then they put them in. They put Bush in for Cheney to control. That's it. That's why Cheney chose Bush. Bush didn't choose Cheney and all that sort of stuff. The wedding versus the demonstrators, again, just that wonderful dichotomy that actually did happen. And, all the demonstrators outside and inside, he's got that terrible little weird tucks and tails and he's got, ha ha. Oh, and that smile. And again, this is the thing that matters, isn't it? This is why it's a great performance because yes, Hopkins doesn't necessarily look physically like Nixon in some ways, but gets that awkward smile down so well, and gets the mannerisms down. So Anthony Hopkins went through a real. He admitted it in his own Charlie Rose interview. He was coasting a bit. He'd won the Oscar for Lecter. He'd played a series of roles that were somewhat similar in Howard's End and Remains of the Day and Shadowlands, of these people who he described as being dead from the kneecaps up. And he became very, very good at that interiority, not to negate those incredible performances. But
he was coasting.
He felt like he was coasting. And on the other hand, he felt like this was the height of his career, money-wise and fame-wise, which obviously it was, to say he was in his 50s. And Stone came to Hopkins and he said, "Why me?" and all that sort of thing. And he was having a real complex about it. And then James was described how one day he just came in and then there he was in the corner. Oh, yeah, sure. He's not. All the reporting around Hopkins is not that he's fully method, but on set and in preparation, he's incredibly
focused.
Oh yes, the one of the old stories is that he writes out every word in the script and stands on it for 20 minutes. Is one of he reads the script 200 times per script. That's another one. Again, everybody has different things.
I did find one of my favorite sort of moments, or they sort of describe it in the movie, Nixon's face, as his smiles never where his face is at the same time, sort of thing. And it did,
and not even just on the bad CGI when they put his face in the.
But there was a moment where he's about to walk into a sort of a press briefing with the POWs who have just come back from Vietnam, but he's coming through the hallways of the White House, kind of having this massive argument and discussion about what's about to come out, what he's culpable for, what he's not culpable for, ways they can damage control and manage this, and who they can pay off. And he's got this sort of intense concentration. The door is open, and for a solid second and a half, he's kind of stood there still in all of that, and then snaps on the smile to go meet the POWs, but just the kind of 1,000-yard stare that doesn't leave his eyes, even as the smile hits his face, because there's just always a whole world of other stuff going on in the background of his head at any given time.
Almost every single reporter, or where he goes to speak to the press, and he starts off so, politician-y, for lack of a better word, and so on it. And so, oh yes, and this is what we're going to do. One question from a reporter. Didn't expect that. One question from a reporter. And these incredible Stone zooms.
The constant sweat just pouring off of his face as he's, yeah, it was great. I mean, you can definitely see the awkward kind of kid just desperate to be loved at the same time that you see the Machiavellian power player,
People always talk about how, the TV debate, Kennedy versus Nixon, everybody knows the fact that people on the radio thought that Nixon had won. And you talk about the sweat and that sort of thing. Stone is not shy away from the sweat, from the awkwardness. There is no glamorization in any way, shape, or form here. And there is, and again, we don't see Kennedy portrayed, obviously, in JFK, but there is obviously an element. The whole film is an ode to Kennedy in so many ways. And then this movie, on the other hand, ends with that just genuinely incredible prayer scene, I think. And from the moment you mentioned that Kissinger, this isn't good for you, is it? And just nothing. And then Alexander Haig, history will treat you more kindly than your contemporaries. And the prayer, God, please forgive me, God, and that in covering his face to Kissinger as he
Kissinger
weeps.
Can't see him cry. Yeah,
I mean, it's genuinely astounding acting. Whether he
it's just such
looks
a
like him or
subtle
not.
build up to his breakdown there, kind of where he's realized it's over. It really and truly is over, and whatever his aspirations might have been, whatever good he might have wanted to bring. That was another reason I thought this movie sort of lent more towards the idea that the president is a powerful figure, but is beholden to a larger system, in that I think the movie went out of its way to constantly portray Nixon as a guy who wanted to bring about good change, who wanted to do good things. But the only way he could accomplish those things in his mind was horrific kind of corruption and back alley deals and extrajudicial killings, essentially. And
exactly,
by the end of the movie, he kind of realizes, like, whatever my intent.
And we're back. We have been bugged by.
Despite his best intentions.
Despite his best intentions, David.
Sorry?
Despite his best intentions?
Oh, despite his best intentions, he's still beholden to a larger system, which he is largely incapable of influencing or doing anything to change.
Indeed. Thomas Ridley's specific favourite parts of the film. When Commander Haig first walks into the Lincoln room and sees a raging fire and the air conditioning blasting. Lovely little bizarre choice. One of those stranger than fiction things. I love, obviously, Stone does this a lot of violently cutting in real life clips, including the shooting of Governor Wallace and then cutting back to Nixon. I had nothing to do with that. And it's like whether he believes it or not.
Yeah, he oftentimes says these things, and it leaves you in doubt as to whether or not he actually had nothing to do with that, which I think is generally the idea. And largely how he played things in his presidency was sort of kind of giving tacit approval for things while maintaining a sort of plausible deniability, in that I never directly ordered it. I just didn't say no when someone else suggested it.
Culpable deniability. Nixon struggling with a child lock on their spills. As we've already mentioned, don't be ridiculous. Nobody has ever contested an American election. Jack Wallace, the cameraman from Boogie Nights, popping up. He's the worst athlete I've ever seen, but he's got guts. Dan Hedea's reactions to Nixon's succession speech at the start. Given the shaft, what you're going to be missing, you won't have Nixon to kick around anymore. Yes. The early sort of news on America roll Citizen Kane speech thing that they do then and again. One of the leading lights on the infamous House of American Un-American Activities Committee. Checkers the dog, a little cocker spaniel, Senator Crate from Texas.
It's the lie that gets you.
Again, whether it's on the nose or not, bottom right-hand screen, 1963, Dallas. What do we cut to? Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime! Again, whether he believes it or not, I'll use the old Nixon charm. Oh, right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, great.
I love the racism of Haldeman when he's like, he sounded white when we screened him. Well, he sounds like Angela Davis now, and like, yeah, no, okay, we'll cut to the one black guy. Yeah, let's have a question from the black guy. This will make us look good. Stretches, stands up.
It reminded me of another line later on when he's going through the transcripts of the tapes. Kevin said all this makes me sound like a goddamn anti-Semite.
Yeah. Jew? He's sort of go, Jews? I didn't say that. You did, sir. No, Nixon didn't say that. And then
Nixon didn't say that. Yeah. His habit of speaking in the third person, which I knew of it that from Futurama, and I always just thought of it as sort of like a funny joke, but no, the man did speak in the third person about his sort of political character more often than not.
Which takes us back to the very, very start of the film. The whether it works for you or not, you starting off with the salesman's advert. Why the G. God and Liddy team are watching a salesman's black and white reel before heading into Watergate? I don't know.
It's such a random place to throw in John C. McGinley as well. Like literally a 30-second cameo at the very beginning of the movie and never to appear again as a character.
He's a Stone guy. So I think it was like,
he's one of the guys he always has in, yeah.
What are you really selling? Yourself. A good salesman could sell anything.
They really nothing sells like sincerity.
We bombed the hell out of these people. Cut straight to Cambodia. So you're powerless? No. No. No, I'm not powerless. Kissinger and Ellsberg. He sees a therapist in LA. He's all fucked up. Again, there's little moments. Checkers not taking the biscuit from him. Maybe he just doesn't like. He doesn't like me. Talking about his dog now. Even his dog doesn't like him. I go now to take the exact width, length, and depth of the shaft. Fucking Kennedy got away with everything. I shouldn't laugh at anti-Semitism, but Haldeman's New York City rant.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
Just the bizarre, the witticism of a terrible racist. And I also love in there Ehrlichman's reaction to it. I'm like, and I could be wrong. Ehrlichman sounds like I know Kissinger was Jewish, but I don't know if Ehrlichman was Jewish as well. Sounds like a Jewish name. And just that look of, did he just say New York City? What are we dealing with here?
Yeah. Also, just really funny thing I thought, because I was looking kind of at after the movie, I went and had like a look at all the various figures and stuff that were portrayed, and with Anthony Hopkins looking absolutely nothing like Nixon, the pitch perfect casting for like almost everybody else in terms of appearance. I mean, James Woods looks almost exactly like Haldeman to like an uncanny degree.
David Hyde Pierce as John Deere. I mean, I don't know where this is in the. I think this must be before Frasier, because Oliver Stone's saying in an interview, David Hyde Pierce. I know he's done a few things before, but he's a relative find. I was like, David Hyde Pierce is your find. How lucky are you to have even your small roles be filled with future stars? And again, let's talk about Paul Sorvino, Paulie from Goodfellas. Big Italian guy, the best performance. I mean, the most astounding.
Henry Kissinger. I mean, he was perfect down to the voice and everything. We have to consider the possibility.
So he managed to meet. I watched again, Paul Sorvino again. Where the Oscar push went, I don't know, but that could have been, to me, in my mind, an easy Best Supporting Actor nomination. That they
Paul Sorvino was an excellent Kissinger. I mean, he fucking nailed it
to such an extent, and I have no shame in admitting this. I didn't realize it was Paul Sorvino when I first watched it in the middle of the ocean.
Wow!
Until it got to the credits, and again, maybe it's because the film already runs at 3 hours 15. They start playing the credits over the ending speech. It's like, yeah, let's get him out. And then we cut to the everybody playing everybody. I was like, Paul Sorvino? And it was, and I was like, very similar to when I watched Ali for the first time, and John Voight as Howard Kessel. And I was like, what? Yeah. No, very, 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 very good stuff. And then I've got the end moments from the ending. Oh, Mom. Oh God, please forgive me. And then, I mean, ending your big historical presidential biopic with an ending like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? God, I've always been afraid of the dark. And then walking off
into an uncertain future.
It's one hell of a choice, and it's wonderful.
And I think they were sort of like playing with the idea that he realized the sort of irreversible damage that he had done to the idea of like faith in American institutions and the functioning of American democracy. It's a very dark sort of political future Nixon left behind for the United States in a way. I thought it's a very poignant kind of walking off into the uncertain future there for him.
It's and Nixon successfully managed to pull back, and not much, but he managed to be an elder statesman. He released multiple memoirs. He was well revered. To look at how his presidency ended, you'd think he would be the most, and in some ways he is, but you'd think he would be the most disgraced president of all time. You never come back from that, never have any sort of, to have even the Republicans turn on you. you're not gonna do much fighting back. And then, but history is long, and you end with Clinton, talking at your funeral, and Monica's probably somewhere in the crowd. History is long, and there is always something else to come.
Well, and the ruling class sticks together.
Exactly. Any weirdly specific favorite moments, David? I don't know what you took down.
I did love the bloody steak after discussing the possibility of dropping nukes on Cambodia.
Who made this? Who
made this steak? There's blood all over my plate.
Again, on the nose.
On the nose, a little bit.
It works.
But it worked. It worked quite well.
No, I like it. Yeah. Movie is very, very loose. So, best single minutes. These are the tapes. Nixon's never been good with these things, Al. Sucker.
Yes.
The wonderful Madeline Kahn, who plays Martha Mitchell. And the minute that Stone cast Madeline Kahn and got her on board and started filming with her, he wanted to expand the role. There wasn't really a place for the role to be expanded, fortunately. But this goes to what we were talking about, having Madeline Kahn, one of our great comedians, one of our great actresses of all time, showing up for 2 minutes. Her 2 minutes are great. I did sort of love the moment of him kind of taking her hand off of his thigh, kind of like, no, this is my rule, sort of thing. I'll go to the parties with the. That's not sorry. That's not Madeline Kahn. Madeline Kahn.
Oh no, was that not?
Madeline Kahn's is Martha Mitchell, the columnist, I think was frightened by my child.
Yes. Okay, yes.
But that does lead into another great single minute, which is his one rule. Dan Hedaya trying to get him to fuck.
That's who it was. Yeah.
Again, I think that's all just heightened by Madeline Kahn's early death. Madeline McCann's early death. Jesus Christ. I got my pillows and I got my Nixon. I phrased this incredibly bizarrely. Edgar finishing off Nixon. Don't remember that scene.
Yeah, can't say I remember that part.
But it was the poorest lemon ranch. And then,
yes. Reading off his lines to him. Yeah.
You may go, Wacky.
Yeah.
Very good.
Great moments.
And his brother dying of TB. Something has to come of this. And that, whether you believe in it or not, that biblical righteousness of strength in this life, happiness in the next.
It sounds fucking miserable, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And sort of a tragic idea of this life isn't meant to be enjoyed or lived fully. It's meant to just be endured for the promise that maybe something better will be around the other side.
And the way, again, this part is more, I can understand this part of the religiousness of it, but Mary Steenburgen, and this death is a gift from thy brother, and through the intense depression of losing and how to recontextualize that. North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only the Americans can do that.
Yeah. And we did.
Sounds like a really, really liberal thing to say. That could be said by Kamala right now. Like talking about January 6th. But again, this episode comes out after
the election, so we'll all be waiting with bated breath. I have my ballot.
First speech as president with the montages of the horrors of '68 and the civil rights and the soft intro. Right. John Williams wrote this incredible score. John Williams obviously also wrote
everything else,
including Vader's themes. Listen, watch that speech again, and tell me if I'm wrong. You can hear the bum, ba bum, ba bum, bum. It's so soft. I don't know whether that is Williams writing for nearly 60 years and some themes creeping in again. I heard it. I could be wrong.
I also find marches, like as the musical form of marches, is very common in sort of like American patriotic music. And so I think you've got the Imperial March, which is, the typical stereotypical evil song, but it just happens to share a lot musically with tons of American political music.
Much to Oliver Stone's advantage when it comes to, And then Oliver Stone is so soft-spoken in all of these interviews for Nixon. I don't know, like James, this is a quote from James Woods. He said, Oliver Stone, notorious for his furious and chaotic directing style, and when they made Salvador together early in their career, they got in multiple fistfights. And during Nixon, he was very, very soft. And he said to James Woods said to him, "Are you taking Zoloft?" And you watch the Oliver Stones and the interviews for Nixon, and it feels like he's a lot calmer, a lot less defensive, and I can just hear him now going, did you intentionally reintroduce the Vader theme into? You can hear that. Musical themes are very, and he's so soft on this one. Whereas Nixon, he was like, no, that's no. Actually, you can find this document and this document and this document. So I don't know. Does he? I mean, obviously, he's devoted the entire rest of his life to JFK. So I understand. I know the answer. But do you think there was less of a burden of this movie could change things here with Nixon? This movie is a movie in its own right.
I think the thing is with Nixon, everybody kind of already knows that he's a corrupt, sort of dirty politician. Yeah. Like a sort, I think history does view him somewhat kinder than his contemporaries, but it's like kind of you were saying earlier, he is sort of like the go-to answer when people think of like worst presidents in American history or most corrupt presidents in American history. Nixon's that guy. So
I think you've got like Watergate.
Yeah.
You've got
Cambodia.
Yeah.
You've got starting the crack epidemic and criminalizing drugs as an expedient way of disposing of his political enemies.
Going against the students in '68 and Kent State, and instead of trying to unite the country, going against them and making them a violent enemy. And you've got all of that, and then the next big quote unquote scandal. Every president's done awful things and lived through terrible times. And so you've got, Reagan dealing with the AIDS pandemic and that sort of thing. But I wouldn't say you've got necessarily epidemic rather. But you've not necessarily got a quote unquote true blue, pardon the pun, scandal until Clinton and Lewinsky. And that's just an affair, not just an affair.
So, I think for Oliver Stone, there's less to defend in this movie in that he is not necessarily revealing stuff about Nixon that everybody doesn't already know. Yes. Outside of the sort of more personal drama and the idea of him as like a flawed person. I think, there's a lot less to defend. This movie is not trying to like make a huge statement, I think, in the same way that Kennedy was. It's sort of like this is all stuff that we know with Nixon. Nixon is the archetypal corrupt politician sort of thing.
On the other hand, it does posit rather boldly that Nixon was involved
in the death of John F. Kennedy.
Death of John Kennedy.
Well, and
with enough plausible, with enough deniability.
Those 18 minutes that are missing, could say, and like as it says at the end of the movie, out of like 4,000 hours worth of tape, 60 have been made public.
60.
And of those 60, we've got some pretty horrific shit in those 60, hours worth of content. Enough that it would not shock me at all. I seriously doubt that Nixon directly gave an order for John F. Kennedy to be killed, but I do certainly think that the sort of shadowy extrajudicial CIA group that he created most certainly was involved in the death of one of the only American presidents to be openly critical of the CIA and to threaten to defund them and shut them down. I can see how he could feel some responsibility for that.
It's a wonderful, wonderful film. And then one of the you just get two great actors, give them great dialogue. I love maybe my favorite scene apart from the prayer at the end. I love Haldeman and Ehrlichman in the hallways. James Woods and JT Walsh just walking around, and you've got the tour group coming through, and they're just whispering and talking about this is what we know. This is how we can pivot it. And you want to talk and those maneuverings. I just think it's a really well done little moment.
And by the way, we're both next, right?
Yeah. When he says Bay of Pigs, why would he be talking about Bay of Pigs? And everybody's on the same level. The wonderful, again, late great JT Walsh died. I think he was late 90s, sudden cancer. Anyway, brilliant, of course, as what's he called in A Few Good Men? Anyway, when he's like, I'm sorry about your son. Bang. I could have done better. Wonderful.
Something that scene reminded me of. This movie is full of Dutch angles.
Oh yeah,
Dutch angles out the ass.
Yeah.
Nixon.
It's again when making a big 3 hour and 15 minute or 3 hour 30 minute if you're watching the election year Blu-ray 3 hour 15 minute movie, mostly about guys talking alone in a room. Again, Oppenheimer was this huge success, but that isn't necessarily what people are rushing to go see. You need a dynamic filmmaker. You need somebody like a Stone, like a Nolan, and you need a lot of great actors. And Nixon has that in spades. Rewatching Nixon now, I'm amazed it didn't get some sort of major critical reappraisal on the back of Oppenheimer. How can people not watch Nixon, not watch this, watch Oppenheimer, and not see the exact form? And Nolan has been open about it, but the exact formula of this sort of biopic.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's a tale as old. I mean, it's as old as Greek tragedies in a way. I mean, they borrow heavily on those kinds of themes of like, a hero figure whose own kind of inherent qualities, are their sort of own undoing, and the audience is aware of it from the very beginning that they're going to see this person's tragic downfall. And the drama kind of comes from seeing how that unfolds, knowing that it's coming. The Dutch angles help with that.
They do. And again, the grand operatic nature of it, and the build and the build and the build. Touched on. And obviously also when it comes to John Williams reintroducing more music, he brings back the drum roll from JFK, which again is just reincorporating just traditional music. Best line. We took it, can you imagine what this man would have been if anyone had ever loved him? I like that one. Any other ones, David, before I just start plowing through?
I think the one I already mentioned there, you couldn't stop it even if you wanted to, could you?
Could you? Yeah. I bet if I was president, they wouldn't have killed me. How many did you have, Abe? Hundreds of thousands. Where would we be without death? Abe, who's helping us? Is it God or death?
Or is it death?
I feel too much sometimes. The sort of thing that nobody would imagine him to say or do or feel, but it is in there. What's the change? I only have a couple. Showing the real Nixon at the end. We already know what Nixon looks like, and to literally cut from Hopkins to him is when you really notice.
You really see it, yeah. I mean, I could see it. I mean, it ties it up nicely. I think kind of Oliver Stone has this tendency of showing like the real life footage interspersed with everything else. And I guess with Anthony Hopkins not coming onto the screen anymore, and you're wrapping up with like the funeral and everything, I can see how it works, like chucking in the footage of him leaving the White House sort of thing as a way to tie it all together. And
then the upside down American flag imposed over the speech was maybe a touch too much for me. Do you have any other nominations, David, for What's the Change?
No, not generally. I think the movie, for being as chaotic as it is, holds together quite well. And I think a lot of it, if you took something away, other stuff wouldn't work in a way.
If you're along for the ride, there are very few changes you can often have with these sorts of grand movies. You might have the biggest change of all, which is that you think that it's politically reprehensible and factually inaccurate.
I want them to show Nixon as more of a villain, damn it.
Yeah. Best specific Halloween costume is probably Ed Harris, Howard Hunt costume from Watergate. A few fun facts. Writer, producer, and director Oliver Stone said he voted for Richard Nixon in 1968 based on his pledge to end the Vietnam War.
I can see that.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, who was it that he was running against at the time? I forget the name now.
68. Oh, I don't know. It wasn't Wallace. It wasn't.
This was all back during kind of the ideological party swap as well, where the sort of the Democratic Party became less the conservative holdouts and more of the progressive. It was sort of in the midst of like that switch. Can't remember.
It's one of those things. Right. Sorry. So one of the great Oliver Stone scripts is Patton, of course, from 1970, which was rather famously Richard Nixon's favorite film. And so they wanted to have moments where Nixon was watching Patton, but they couldn't sort the rights out and couldn't figure it out, despite Oliver Stone having written Patton. And that he wanted the specific speech where Patton discusses Americans have never lost and will never lose a war because their very thought of losing is hateful to Americans.
One I used myself.
And another issue was George C. Scott did not relinquish his image rights from the movie Patton. So again, George C. Scott, a very, very, very liberal person. Against having his image used. I'm a liar.
Scott
I'm a
and
liar.
Anthony Hopkins are locked in a room together. Who's walking out?
I'm a liar. What on earth am I talking about? I knew it was a famous director. Oliver Stone did not write the script for Patton. Francis Ford Coppola wrote the script for Patton.
I was ready to go along with it because you're generally the one more knowledgeable, but I was like, I didn't realize that Oliver Stone had also done Patton.
No, Oliver Stone, the scripts that Oliver Stone wrote before he became a director were Midnight Express, the Turkish prison movie, and one of the drafts of Scarface. Okay. Sorry, pardon me. I can only firmly apologize. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
My God. How does one promote a movie like Nixon with these taglines? He changed a world, but lost a nation. History repeats itself.
Huh.
Yeah. He had greatness within his grasp. Triumphant in victory, bitter in defeat. He changed the world, but lost a nation. They're all kind of around the same.
Yeah.
They're all
that's that 13.7 million box office for you.
Yeah. So, right. We're 1995. We're releasing this movie. What angle would you have taken? Because you've not got a Kevin. You've not got a Kevin Costner. You've not got. But there's no place for a Kevin Costner in this movie. There's no.
You've already got Anthony Hopkins. So I mean the poster I think is excellent. The sort of like brooding face of Anthony Hopkins with the Nixon right over it. I think you play up the scandalous nature of it. I mean, he had just passed away at the time. You sort of make it the tell-all biopic, the unauthorized, real
but we also,
story.
We go back to something. Oh, what film is that? I can't remember. Anyway, I think I mentioned the movie Primary Colors before, which was a huge bomb at the time because it was effectively the Clinton story, but came out only like 2 years after. So everyone was like, we know.
Yeah, we heard all of this a couple years ago.
Do you think it was all just a little bit too close? Like everybody kind of already knew there was no great secret to be revealed?
Yeah, well, I think sort of like we were already saying with, kind of juxtaposing this with Kennedy. Yeah, there's no huge secret revealed in this movie. It's more just, it's a very good dramatization of the personal crises of a very flawed politician. But everybody already knew that about him. So, and it could be that, at the time in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of goodwill for Nixon and people just weren't that interested in hearing about the story of his life because there was still a lot of kind of residual resentment towards the things that he had done.
and
Makes
a
it hard to
huge
sell.
swathe of people who didn't agree with JFK and didn't like the movie JFK. You know,
Yeah.
it's had its critical reclamation time after
I
time
think
after time.
I think it would be like if you tried to put out a biopic of like Harvey Weinstein right now, sort of thing.
Yeah. Or
People
that
would,
terrible bombshell movie, the Roger Ailes movie.
yeah,
And it's and yeah. Anyway, and you're dealing with caricature and that sort of thing. I mean, look at we had the Comey Rule. Did anybody watch the Comey Rule with Brendan Gleeson as Trump and all? Anyway, it's like again we're on the eve of The Apprentice that comes out next week. It'll come out
yes,
months and months from now, and has won nothing or has won everything. But that seems to be an angle a bit more like this, where a bit more interior, a bit more about the things that we don't see. Multiple interviews. Paul Sorvino managed to, Henry Kissinger managed to get the script. I brought it on himself, the tragedy of Nixon. It's good. And he said to Paul Sorvino, of course I look like a slime ball, but it's not a big part, which is fine. The wonderful James Woods. So Haldeman also had personal tapes. So literally went home every night and recorded himself like saying, talking about the entire thing, and then later released his own book. And Woods managed to get a hold of some of these tapes, and he talked about how the mundanity of like, yeah, bombed Cambodia today, we're taking the kids out bowling. And you've got a whole, that's another thing that I think beyond Nixon's interior struggle, and the rest of the people, I mean, people that we haven't even really mentioned, E.G. Marshall shows up, and Saul Rubinek shows up, people showing up for these tiny, tiny moments. Oliver Stone, I'll leave that one for last. Hopkins said, I'm a big defender of Oliver. Oliver is the big bad boy of Hollywood because he's an outsider. Maybe he talks too much. Maybe he lectures too much. But, a big defender. And then we end on, one more James Woods quote. He says he thinks the movie is Citizen Kane, which in many ways in structure, form, and bombacity it is. And I think on a level of, I'm not going to come out and say that Nixon's as good as Citizen Kane, but it's very, very good and underrated film. And I think this leads into how this is different and similar to JFK. Oliver Stone. It's about a man keeping secrets, not about the secrets. And that is, of course, the big difference between JFK and this, is that JFK is nothing but the secrets. I've only got a few some big quick. I mean, we've touched on it kind of already. If Hoover had been alive, none of these tapes would have come out. The machinations of Hoover leading into it, and then Larry Hagman's Jack Jones character, probably the most controversial aspect of the film. The killing of JFK. Suppose Kennedy don't run in '64, and aren't you forgetting where you are? Who put you where you are? People put me where we are, Jack, and all that.
Yeah, that was as far as favorite 10-minute stretches go. I forgot to mention that scene. Excellent.
The wonderful Larry Hagman. Yeah. Any final thoughts, David, on the wonderful Nixon, or for that matter, as we conclude this double bill, Oliver Stone's presidential JFK?
I think these two make a nice companion pieces. And having not seen W,
you're okay.
Not really planning on seeing it. I think these two kind of bookend each other nicely with sort of the idealism and the hope, and the sort of struggle against corruption that sort of Kennedy presents, versus the kind of political cynicism and power playing and maybe sort of the truth of American politics.
Yeah,
kind of presented by this one. I think they bookend each other quite nicely. And there's a nice through line with the both of these in the sort of, the idealism of Kennedy and the cynicism of the Nixon administration.
And then you throw in his Vietnam trilogy as well. Platoon, was born on the 4th of July with Heaven and Earth, rather, sorry. And you've got, and he even talks about how The Doors also reflects another angle of this sort of thing, of the 60s countercultural aspect. And obviously that's told through the story about The Doors. But I think it's not necessarily a shame, but I mean, you look at his last movies, Savages was really poor. Snowden, I think there was a build-up before Snowden of, is Snowden going to be a return to form? And unfortunately, that's not necessarily was.
Well, I think it's harder in today's sort of political landscape, I think, to make a movie like these in a way. everything's just so messy and kind of like all out there for the world to see and constantly commented on, and
Yeah.
In a way that things just weren't back, in the 90s, I guess, when he was making, Kennedy and Nixon. It was easier to make kind of a clear-cut statement about things, and there was more of an agreed-upon idea of like fact.
I mean, he still has his finger on a pulse. 2017, he goes to Russia and does a 4-hour miniseries with Putin, the Putin interviews. I haven't watched those yet, and they're on my list. But he's still got a finger, and he's a deeply, deeply political man, and there's a great filmmaker, and obviously that leads to the combination of the two. And although he has perhaps more political films, I think Nixon, JFK, again, am I giving Nixon and JFK points, more points because they're so big and still work? I have a tendency, I feel, to promote the 2-hour, the 3.5-hour excellent movie more than the 2-hour excellent movie. Again, in the words of Roger,
it's so good, you just want more of it.
In the words of Roger Ebert, no bad movie is too short and no good movie is too long. And we go from there. David, thank you very, very much. Our next double bill is Seven Samurai, which we've already recorded.
And Magnificent Seven.
Followed by the Magnificent Seven, which we are yet to record. So thank you very, very much, David. And go vote. By that, I do mean in 4 years from now, because this episode will come out post-election. So vote him out or vote her back in. Please, God. Yeah, please, good God. In the words of Richard Nixon, please, God, my mother. Please, God.